now. So just to start, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Positive Choices webinar. My name is Dr. Emma Devine, and I'm a researcher at the Matilda Centre for Research in Mental Health and Substance Use here at the University of Sydney. And I'm also the project manager for Positive Choices. So big welcome and thank you for joining us today. So we are all coming together from different parts of the country today. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connection to land, water and community. So today I'm currently on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. And I further acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which you are and pay my respects to their elders past and present as well. I'd also like to acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are joining us today for the webinar, and welcome people to add into the chat from what lands they're joining us today as well. So a little bit of housekeeping. Before we go into today's presentation, just a couple of things to be aware of. So as participants at this webinar, you are currently on what's called listen only mode. And what that means is that we can't see or hear you. If you are having any issues or having difficulty with sound, anything like that, you can pop it into the chat. And we've got the wonderful Amelia Russell behind the scenes today helping us out with all things tech. So she will do her best to help in any way that she can. The webinar today is being recorded and it will be made available to you after the webinar, and it'll also be available on the Positive Choices website. And then finally, we do have a question and answer session at the end of today's webinar. So as we're going through the session today, if you do have questions, please feel free to pop them into the Q&A box, which you should be able to see on your Zoom screen down the bottom, or I guess the top, depending on how your layout is. But yeah, as we go, feel free to pop anything in there. So just before we get into today's session, if you are new to Positive Choices, I'll just start with a quick overview. So Positive Choices is a website that provides access to trustworthy, up-to-date and evidence-based alcohol and other drug information, as well as education resources. And they're targeted really for parents, school staff and students. So that whole school community perspective. Positive Choices is funded by the Australian Government Department of Health and Aged Care, and it was developed by the Matilda Centre for Research in Mental Health and Substance Use here at the University of Sydney in consultation with teachers, parents and students. Some examples of resources that we have housed on Positive Choices include fact sheets, videos, webinars, games, and we also have classroom-based drug prevention programs that have been proven to reduce drug-related harms. So I do encourage you to visit our website and have a look at some of those resources if anything was of interest. So now on to today's webinar. So we are focusing on vaping today. We're really, really excited to have Dr. Amy Rowe and Annabelle Hawkins present for us today. So I'll start with little quick intros for them. So Dr. Rowe is a postdoctoral researcher at the Matilda Centre, and her current research focuses on the development and evaluation of preventive e-health interventions for young people. Amy is coordinating the OurFutures Vaping study, which they will speak about today, which is a large multi-site RCT or randomized control trial, and it's also the first rigorous evaluation of a school-based e-cigarette prevention program in Australia. Amy is also the lead consultant for the New South Wales Ministry of Health in developing their next wellbeing policy for young people. And then Annabelle Hawkins is a research assistant at the Matilda Centre, and Annabelle is coordinating the Taking Evidence-Based Health and Wellbeing Programs to Scale study, which is primarily focused on upscaling evidence-based prevention programs in secondary school context. So OurFutures and Preventure are two of those that you can also find through Positive Choices, all with the aim of reaching more students and better understanding what works for delivery of such prevention programs in Australian contexts. Annabelle also works on the OurFutures Vaping study, along with Amy as well. So thank you, Amy and Annabelle. We're really excited to have you, and I'll hand over to you.
Thanks so much, Emma. I will just now share my screen, and thank you also to Positive Choices for having us here today to present. So hi, everyone. Can you all see my slides? I think it should be sharing. Beautiful. So as Emma mentioned, myself and my colleague Annabelle will be presenting today on a school-based approach to vaping prevention and also introducing you to the OurFutures prevention model. So just quickly to let everyone know that Annabelle and I do not have any conflicts of interest to declare, and we have not received any funding from any tobacco, vape, or pharmaceutical companies. Just a broad overview of what our webinar will cover today. So I'm going to start by giving you a brief background on the issue of adolescent vaping, and I'll include things like the current prevalence rates and what we know at this point about the harms. I'll then cover some practical strategies for approaching vaping prevention at the individual level before I cover what we know about school-based prevention from 2 decades of research and how we're now applying that knowledge to the issue of vaping prevention. I'll then hand over to Annabelle, who will walk you through our extensive development and co-design of the OurFutures Vaping program. And Annabelle will introduce you to the final program and tell you about our large cluster randomized controlled trial. And this type of rigorous evaluation is really what sets the OurFutures programs apart. Importantly, Annabelle will also explain how you or your school can register for early access. So by way of background, I thought I would start with the complete basics. I'm sure that you're all familiar with the various names of electronic cigarettes. They're most commonly referred to as vapes, but you can also hear them referred to as e-cigs, mods, vape pens, e-hookah, Juul, and Stigs. And so in case you weren't aware, those last two are the brand names of some of the popular products. Vaping refers to the act of inhaling and exhaling an aerosol which is produced by an electronic cigarette. And you'll notice there that I've underlined aerosol. And this is because one of the most common misconceptions about vaping is that it is just harmless water vapor. And this is, of course, incorrect. So it's one of those myths that's quite problematic because it really contributes to the lowered or inaccurate harm perception around vapes. So by definition, a vapor is the gaseous state of something that is normally a liquid, whereas an aerosol is the suspension of tiny particles of a liquid and or solids within a gas. So what you can see there on the screen with the vape devices pictured, these are what are known as pod mods. They are the fourth or latest generation of vaping devices, and they're the ones that you commonly find at tobacconists and convenience stores. So these are usually pre-filled, they are closed systems and are disposable. They have really sleek designs and bright, colourful packaging, and they also come in a variety of fruity and lolly-like flavours, which we know has a direct appeal to young people. We also know that these devices typically contain very high doses of nicotine, even when it's not indicated on the label. So then why is adolescent vaping a concern? Firstly, vaping is still a relatively new phenomenon and research takes time. So we're still learning about a lot of the potential longer-term harms. And we also have varying levels of evidence for the different harms that we are aware of at this point. However, I thought it might be useful for me to briefly summarize what we do know in this space. So we know that vaping poses a great risk for a young person to become addicted to nicotine. So when a person vapes, nicotine is able to reach the brain really quickly. And since the adolescent brain is still developing, it is much more susceptible to the effects of nicotine. So therefore, it's much quicker and easier for a young person to become addicted to nicotine than it is for an adult. Next, we have the exposure to harmful chemicals. So in the aerosol, there are around 250, sometimes more, chemicals, and this includes volatile organic compounds, ultrafine particles, carcinogens, and heavy metals, all of which can be inhaled directly into the lungs. And it's important here to note that even though some of those chemicals have proven safe for ingestion, to date, none of them have proven safe for inhalation. Then on to the health risks. So we know that vaping poses a risk to respiratory health. There is something known as e-cigarette and vaping associated lung injury, or EVALI. We also know that it can cause irritation of the mouth and airways, as well as persistent coughing. There's some emerging evidence around cardiovascular health risks, including impacts on blood pressure, causing tachycardia, atrial fibrillation, myocardial infarction, and also chest pain. Poisoning and seizures can occur from inhaling too much nicotine or from the ingestion of the nicotine e-liquid. Burns and injuries can be caused by the e-cigarette overheating and even exploding. And also just using too much of a vape can lead to nausea and vomiting. Now, what about mental health? So research suggests that there is an association between e-cigarette use during adolescence and an increased risk of various mental health concerns. Although it's really important that I mention here that causality has not been established. So we cannot say that vaping causes mental health issues. And the reason for this is that we need more longitudinal research. So this is where we need to follow young people up over time, and then we can better understand this relationship. Nonetheless, we do still have evidence, and the findings that I presented here come from 2 recent reviews which have demonstrated associations between adolescent vaping and depression, suicidality, disordered eating, ADHD, conduct disorder, impulsivity, perceived stress, and also there is some limited and mixed evidence around an association between vaping and anxiety. We also know that nicotine can interfere with sleep patterns. So this can lead to disturbances in both the quality and duration of sleep. And we know it's well established that sleep is very crucial for overall mental health and well-being. And then we also know that some young people use vaping as a form of self-medication to cope with stress, anxiety, or other emotional challenges. So it may not be that vaping is actually causing these mental health concerns, rather it may be used as a way to cope. However, this is quite problematic because it can actually exacerbate these symptoms in the long term and lead to a dependence on nicotine. Now, looking a little bit closer at the impacts of nicotine on the developing brain, so some of these include impacts on cognitive function, so including on learning, memory, and attention. We also know that it can cause changes to the actual brain structure, particularly in the regions that are associated with impulse control and reward processing. We can also see alterations to neurotransmitter levels. So chronic exposure can lead to dysregulation of dopamine levels. And so dopamine is the neurotransmitter that is responsible for those feelings of pleasure and reward. So we know adolescent vaping is a concern, but how many young people are actually doing it? So our team recently explored this using data from our Health for Life study, and this is one of the largest school-based prevention trials in Australia. It includes students from 70 schools across New South Wales, Western Australia, and Queensland. And through this work, we found that 26% of adolescents aged 14 to 17 had tried an e-cigarette in their lifetime. 20% had done so within the last 12 months. 10% had used an e-cigarette in the last 30 days. So this is what we call current use. And almost 6% were current regular users. So this means they had vaped within the past 30 days and were also vaping more than weekly. We also found that the average age of first use was 14 years old, that boys and non-binary participants were more likely than girls to be using an e-cigarette. However, we did not find any differences based on remoteness or socioeconomic status. And I've popped a QR code there if you're interested in having a look at the actual publication on this. It's important for me to mention here as well that this data may not be nationally representative as it only involved 3 Australian states and the majority of young people were living in a major city. However, it does still align with the recent ASAD, so the Australian Secondary School Students Alcohol and Drug Survey. This indicated that 24% of 12 to 15-year-olds had vaped, so quite similar findings there. It's also important that we actually look at these trends over time. So this data that we've got presented here comes from the Department of Health and Aged Care report, which looked at current vaping and current smoking in the Australian population aged 14 plus years. So the data were collected at 6 monthly intervals since 2018. And this was broken down by age groups, which are represented by the different coloured lines. So for our purposes, I'll get you to just focus in on the orange line as this represents the 14 to 17-year-old age group. And the graph that you can see here is examining current vaping. So this is defined as having used an e-cigarette within the past month. So you can see here that there's been a marked increase in current vape use, particularly since 2020. And by 2023, we're seeing 14.5% of 14 to 17-year-olds currently vaping. And that increase was also evident among the older adolescents, so the 18 to 24-year-old age group, who showed the highest rates, and they're represented by the grey line up the top there. Now let's look at the same thing, but for current tobacco use, so defined as having used a regular combustible cigarette in the last 30 days. Again, focusing in on the orange line, which represents our 14 to 17-year-old age group, you'll notice that rates were very, very low initially, but we're actually starting to see an increase in tobacco smoking among this youngest group, and it is coinciding with that 2020 period. And we're now sitting at about a 12.8% prevalence of current tobacco use. So this is a marked increase in a relatively short time and is concerning given we know how harmful tobacco cigarette smoking is. This is also reflected in the statistics around dual use. So this is the term that we use to describe using both tobacco cigarettes and e-cigarettes. And this was reported by nearly 11% of 14 to 17-year-olds. Concerningly, the 14 to 17-year-old age group was the most common age group to be dual users. Now, unfortunately, the evidence we have at this point doesn't allow us to understand whether vaping leads to smoking, and the findings on that across the literature are mixed. But regardless, we want to point out that when we look at the harms of vaping alone, it is clear that efforts towards prevention are critical. So what can you do about this? As I mentioned earlier, I'm going to start by giving some advice at the individual level before I move into the broader area of school-based prevention. So let's start here, because the first steps are really about open and honest communication. And we know it's definitely not easy to start a conversation with a young person about vaping, and there's certainly no foolproof method or magical solution. But we've put together some pointers to help guide you. So the first step is to gather as much information as you can about vaping, because you want to equip yourself with the facts. And it's really important that you choose credible and reliable sources of information. So places like government websites, research institutions, and dedicated organizations. I'll also give a little plug for Positive Choices here because it's such a great portal to guide people with finding evidence-based resources. Next, you want to also brainstorm the type of questions that the young person might ask you and how you'll answer those questions. This will help you to really confidently address their questions. Importantly, you want to approach the conversation from a place of non-judgment. So try to understand things from the young person's perspective and really listen to them. We want you to avoid using scare tactics because we know that these aren't effective. During the conversation, you can correct any misconceptions about vaping. So the fact it's not harmless water vapor, and also the fact that not everyone is doing it. Take this opportunity to set clear and consistent expectations about the use of vapes. Next, you can help them to practice refusal skills. So for many young people, they might not have been placed in a situation where they've had to refuse vapes, alcohol, or other substances. So this means they might not have the dialogue around how to actually confidently say no and what to do in that situation. So practicing this in a safe environment can better equip them when the time comes. You can also talk about sources of peer pressure and work together to strategize how they will handle this. During that conversation, it's also important that you promote healthy alternatives, so things like hobbies, sports, and other activities. And of course, don't be afraid to seek professional help or guidance if you are worried about your young person. Now, it's important that you also know what to look out for as the signs of nicotine addiction. So some of the potential signs include vaping in class, frequent toilet breaks, inattention, irritability, fidgetiness, low mood, and aggression. We recommend asking 3 simple questions to determine whether or not a young person is dependent on nicotine. So the first is, how soon after you wake up do you normally vape? If it's within 30 minutes, chances are they're dependent on nicotine. Then asking, do you vape when you're home alone or on your own? If the answer to this is yes, it is likely that they're dependent on nicotine. And the final question is, do you wake up to vape at night? If the answer is yes, again, likely dependent on nicotine. Now, in addition to the advice I outlined before about talking with a young person about vaping, if you find out your young person is vaping or addicted to nicotine, we have a few extra pointers. So you want to take a strengths-based approach. It's important to remind that young person of their good qualities and focus on empowering them rather than shaming them. It also helps to lead by example, so demonstrating those healthy behaviours yourself by being a non-smoker and a non-vaper. Getting curious and non-judgmental about their reasons for vaping is really important, because a young person who is vaping to self-medicate is going to need very different support to a young person who is just doing it for fun socially. Try to also learn about their concerns about vaping or their concerns about quitting. it's likely that these are going to differ from yours, as young people place much more emphasis on the immediate consequences rather than the longer-term consequences. It's also important to celebrate healthy choices, so reinforcing that positive behaviour by acknowledging and praising good decisions and praising them for taking care of their health and well-being. And again, don't be afraid to seek professional help. We get asked quite a lot about the different types of support that are available for young people to quit vaping. And there are a lot of different options, and chances are you might need to engage with a combination of different services dependent on that particular young person's needs. So I've included some examples here. Excuse me, sorry. So the GP is a really good starting point, particularly if that young person is going to need nicotine replacement therapy or other prescription medications. Youth mental health services are also a good option. So for example, the Kids Helpline. Psychologists and counsellors are really important supports, particularly if a young person is using vapes as a way to manage their mental health symptoms. There are also starting to emerge dedicated vaping cessation clinics. And the first one that we're aware of is one that is run by Professor Renee Batoon at Ramsay Northside. I've included the number there in case anyone is interested, but I know that a lot of the different LHDs and the youth health services are starting to offer vaping cessation supports for young people as well. You can also phone the Quit line, and there's also the My Quit Buddy app, which provides helpful tips and distractions to overcome cravings, tracking systems to chart progress, and facts to help you understand the health impacts. So at the moment, this app is specific to tobacco smoking. However, it is being upgraded and will be released this year to include vaping as well. Now, this is far from an exhaustive list, but hopefully that helps give you a bit of a picture of where you can turn. Now let's zoom out a bit and take a look at the broader picture. How do we make an impact on a bigger scale? So my team and I work in the area of school-based prevention, and we are really passionate about stopping these issues before they even begin. So we think school is the ideal location, and that is for a variety of reasons. So firstly, it's practical. Young people are spending more than 25% of their waking lives there. It also allows us to get in at the time when they first start to experiment. It allows us to educate prior to that harmful exposure, and we can also tailor our messaging to those different developmental levels. So health education is happening anyway, which makes it the perfect opportunity to incorporate evidence-based approaches. But of course, not all approaches to school-based substance prevention are equal. And over the past few decades, there have been a number of reviews and meta-analyses that have been conducted to try and tease out what are the critical components that are making one school-based prevention program more effective than another. And this has resulted in a set of effective principles of school-based drug prevention. So we know that the most effective programs are those with a clear evidence base and that are theory-driven. Now let's just look at that a little bit closer in terms of what it means to be evidence-based, because not all research is created equal, and the term evidence-based gets thrown around quite a lot. So this pyramid here provides an overview of the different types of investigations and represents a ranking of their quality. At the bottom, we have the weakest sources of evidence, and at the top of the pyramid, we have the strongest. So this means that evidence has been derived from the most rigorous evaluation types. We consider top-tier evidence to be that of randomized controlled trials, as well as systematic reviews and meta-analyses. So when we are assessing what works and what doesn't, we optimally rely on these top tiers of evidence. This is also how we evaluate our own programs, and Annabelle will speak a bit more on that shortly. But for now, back to the list. So we also know that the most effective programs are those that are developmentally appropriate and immediately relevant to students. So students are going to be much more interested in something that is going to affect them now, not something that's going to affect them in 20 years' time. We know we have to get in early, prior to harmful use, but this is also a careful balance because you don't want to get in so early that you start to spark the curiosity. Programs are also most effective when they are part of a comprehensive health education curriculum. We know that using peer leaders increases the effects of a program, but it's also important to keep teachers in a central role. We know that interactive teaching methods are much more engaging and that students prefer these to the traditional lecture style methods. And finally, we know that programs that adopt a social influence or comprehensive approach to prevention are the most effective. So this involves providing young people with the information and facts on the harms, along with resistance skills training and normative education to really challenge that view that everyone is doing it, which of course we know isn't true, even if it might seem like it. However, we also know that so much is being asked of teachers and that actually getting programs into schools and delivered to young people is fraught with barriers. So these include things like a lack of resources, be it materials, time, or money, adaptation of programs, which can undermine the program's efficacy, a lack of training for facilitation of programs, schools opting for programs that look good but aren't necessarily evidence-based or effective, and also keeping the program running over the long term. And I'm sure it comes as no surprise that poor implementation leads directly to poor outcomes. So we could clearly see that a new approach to prevention was needed, one that first adhered to the evidence base and had demonstrated its own efficacy through high quality research, one that overcame the barriers to implementation, one that improved student engagement, one that supported teachers and placed minimal burden on them. And it was based on these effective principles that the OurFutures prevention model was developed. And this model has been tried and tested over the past 2 decades through the most rigorous research. So the OurFutures prevention model is universal, meaning it is designed for all students regardless of their level of risk. It adopts a comprehensive social influence and harm minimization approach to prevention. And the core component of these programs are the interactive online cartoon storyboards that allow us to deliver that peer-led messaging style. To date, the programs have been trialled in 8 large randomized controlled trials involving more than 21,000 students. And these have shown that the OurFutures programs can prevent the uptake and reduce the harmful use of alcohol, cannabis, psychostimulants, and emerging drugs during adolescence with lasting effects into early adulthood. So there are 5 modules that are now publicly available via the OurFutures Institute, which is our newly formed not-for-profit organisation. And to date, these programs have reached more than 1,300 schools. So our proposal was to take this very successful prevention model and apply it to the prevention of vaping. So we have created and are currently evaluating the OurFutures Vaping Prevention Program, and I'll now hand over to Annabelle, who will tell you more about it.
Thank you, Amy. I'm now going to walk through the development process of the OurFutures Vaping program. So to begin with, back in 2022, we brought together people with relevant expertise to form an expert advisory group. We then conducted a systematic review and meta-analysis to understand what other school-based preventative interventions were out there and whether or not any of them were effective. We then went into the co-design phase and conducted focus groups and surveys to develop character profiles and the storyline for the module. We then took all of that information, went away to develop the intervention. We wrote scripts, mapped out our key prevention messages, and worked with an illustrator to bring it all to life. Finally, we took each lesson one by one back to students and teachers and made refinements based on their feedback. So I'll now go into a little more detail about each of these steps, starting with the systematic review. As I mentioned, we wanted to know what else was out there in terms of school-based vaping prevention programs and whether or not any of them that were out there were actually effective. We found 11 in total, most of which were from the US and none of which were from Australia. The evidence surrounding them was mixed. Some did successfully prevent the uptake of e-cigarette use, however, some of these had iatrogenic effects, meaning they actually caused harm. So the need remains for new scalable approaches that can be delivered with high fidelity to prevent e-cigarette use, specifically within the unique Australian context. We've made the manuscript for this systematic review available via preprint, so if you're interested, you can go ahead and scan that QR code for now. Now onto our co-design phase. We conducted focus groups with Year 9 students, and these were geared towards the development of the characters and the storylines for the module. So here we were really interested in understanding more about vaping from the perspective of young people, so we could ensure that the stories, characters, and scenarios we created were realistic and actually resonated with the young people. These young people told us that peer pressure, curiosity, and stress relief were some of the key reasons people their age would vape. On the other hand, they told us that an awareness of the harms of vaping, fear about becoming addicted, and concerns for vaping interfering with their sport were key reasons people their age would abstain from vaping. Unsurprisingly, they identified parties, the park, and the school toilets as the most common locations for vaping. This information allowed us to go away and start to develop our characters and storyline for the module. One of the first tasks we undertook was profiling the key characters. Our module has 6 main characters in addition to a narrator. So the young people were really clear on the profiles of people who vape and gave us detailed descriptions down to exactly what clothes a vapor wears. They had identified 3 key personas, the first being the sporty cool guy who vapes to be part of the group, the second being the nerdy gamer who self-medicates with a vape, and the third being the rebellious cool girl. We took all their information and we thought through each character's background, their personality traits, their strengths and weaknesses. We found images online that matched the descriptions that young people gave, and that led us to these character profiles that we then shared with our illustrator. What you can see on the left here is the first version of our character lineup. We knew it needed some refining, so after many iterations and incorporating feedback from our team and young people in our networks, we arrived at this final character lineup. As you can see in those refinements, we've made the characters look younger, we've added jewelry for self-expression, we've changed some of the clothing, we added our first non-binary character and also increased the diversity of the body shapes. Our next challenge was looking at how we deliver something that's educational but also engaging. So we had several brainstorming sessions to arrive at a comprehensive list of key prevention messages that we needed to get across. We then mapped these across key drama points to try and figure out how we wanted the story and education to unfold simultaneously. As I mentioned earlier, we then took the lessons one by one back to students, this time with Year 8 students, as this was our target age group. As you can see, the first lesson was well received, but there was definitely still room for improvement. The students affirmed a lot of things about the cartoon that they felt worked well. For example, they thought that the gossiping and conversations were relatable, that the scenarios were realistic and believable. They loved the diversity of the characters, and they felt that we presented peer pressure well and accurately. There were also a lot of points that they gave us about areas where we could improve. So for example, young people suggested updates to language to make it more in line with the way that they speak. They recommended changes to clothing. They really liked the host who narrates the story and wanted to see him incorporated more. And so we've done that. As you can see in that top image, we started to superimpose the host over particular scenes to ensure he was more included in the whole story. They wanted less text to read, which was a real challenge for us, but we were able to depict things more visually and reduce the amount of text overall. They wanted more expression on character faces. And a big change that they expressed was they felt it wasn't realistic to have the fact-based information coming from these young characters. So to get around this, we had the young characters speaking more generically and supported the precise facts and statistics with these fact checks that you can see in that bottom image. And these also allow us to more easily update these facts as new statistics come out over time. So we've now had teachers and students review the entire module and have continued making refinements. So here you can see some of the changes we've made. In the top 2 images, you can see a change in the character clothing. And we've also made really subtle changes, like in the bottom images, we changed the color of the character's lipstick. By the review of the final lesson, 100% of young people rated it as good or very good, which we were very pleased with. So the final OurFutures Vaping program consists of 4 40-minute lessons, which are ideally delivered 1 week apart during Year 7 or 8 health education classes. Each lesson consists of a web-based cartoon component completed individually by students in approximately 20 minutes, followed by optional teacher-facilitated activities. The program adopts a harm minimization and comprehensive social influence approach. This includes providing evidence-based information about e-cigarettes and tobacco smoking, normative education to correct misperceptions of use, and resistance skills training. So this is an overview of the key messaging across the 4 lessons. I won't go into detail about every point, but as you can see, it's quite comprehensive. The program also takes an integrated approach into addressing e-cigarette use and tobacco cigarette use. So although these are 2 distinct behaviors with unique characteristics, simultaneously targeting both behaviors by addressing core principles that have been effective in tobacco and drug prevention is an efficient and cost-effective strategy. So here's just a sneak preview at one of the scenes from the module. We currently don't have any audio on the cartoons, but are in the process of adding voiceovers. So throughout the cartoon, we also have quizzes and reflective activities to ensure student engagement, comprehension, and critical thinking. As you can see, some of these allow for free text responses, whereas others are multiple choice. We also provide student and teacher summaries, which are fact sheets that summarize the lesson and reinforce the key content. Teachers are also given a PDF booklet containing a range of optional teacher-facilitated activities, including quizzes, class discussions, role plays, and worksheets. We provide guidance on the length of time each activity takes to help teachers choose which activities will work best for their class. Finally, the entire program has been mapped across state and national curricula, and we provide these curriculum mapping documents to support teachers. Now, the thing that sets all our Futures programs apart is the fact that we conduct rigorous evaluation to determine their efficacy. We conduct what is known as a randomized control trial, like Amy mentioned earlier, which is essentially the gold standard for evaluating a program and being able to conclude that it actually works to prevent young people from vaping. In our case, this looks like we have 40 schools and more than 5,000 students participating across New South Wales, Queensland, and Western Australia. These are divided at the school level across the active control group, where 20 of these schools just complete their regular health education as they normally would, and the intervention condition, where those 20 schools receive the OurFutures Vaping program. The key thing we are interested in is whether or not the OurFutures Vaping program is more effective than health education as usual in preventing the uptake of e-cigarette use at the 12-month follow-up. So this is our primary outcome. We're also collecting data and assessing a variety of other outcomes, as you can see there in that purple section. This includes a range of other e-cigarette and tobacco-related variables, as well as mental health, stress, quality of life, and resource use. In addition, students and teachers in the intervention group have completed an online questionnaire to evaluate the program and allow us to understand how engaged students were and whether it was considered acceptable and easy to use. Teachers also complete a logbook so we can assess fidelity, so whether they implemented it as it was intended and what activities they chose to deliver. Website analytics provide us with objective data on the dose and timing of the intervention delivery. Control school teachers have also completed a logbook to understand the amount and format of e-cigarette and tobacco cigarette education delivered to their Year 7 and 8 students. Now, in terms of our timeline, here's an overview of the entire study. So all students in both the control and intervention groups complete online self-report surveys on 6 occasions over 3 years in a supervised classroom setting. We're now approaching our 12-month follow-up, which will occur in term 2 and 3 of this year. This is our primary time point, which will allow us to determine the efficacy of the OurFutures Vaping program, and it's at this point we'll be able to commence an early release to the public. So the OurFutures Institute is a separate not-for-profit organisation who handle the dissemination of all of our publicly available programs. They've set up an early access program, which is contingent on the program demonstrating efficacy at 12-month follow-up. If we do demonstrate that the program is effective, then 250 schools will be able to access the Our Futures Vaping program around term 4 of this year. If you're interested in registering your interest for that early access program, you can access the form via that QR code. And I'll just give you a moment to do that if you are interested. So in conclusion, this is the first rigorous evaluation of a school-based e-health preventative intervention targeting e-cigarette use to occur in Australia. Without such an intervention, we risk undoing decades of effective tobacco control and having young Australians use nicotine at higher rates than previous generations. If the program is effective, the intervention will be able to be readily scaled via the existing Our Futures platform. Finally, we just want to acknowledge our team of 23 investigators across 6 universities and our funding bodies, without whom none of this would be possible. So that's all from me, and I think now we'll head into Q&A.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Amy and Annabelle. It was really great to get that overview, you know, those practical strategies for what adults, I guess it spans, you know, beyond schools, absolutely can do. And also where you're at with the vaping trial. Very exciting that we're coming up to those 12 months. And I'm sure a huge amount of work that has gone into it as well. So well done. We are about to kick off a little Q&A session. We do have some time for some questions. So just encourage, we have got some through already, but just giving people a little moment to pop some into the Q&A box as well. And we will do our best to get through as many as we can. So just to kick us off, let me just get it up. So we have a member of the audience who's reporting that they're noticing a downward trend actually in students vaping at the moment, and are wondering whether this is something you've come across. Is this unique maybe to their school, or and also maybe why that could be happening, if you feel comfortable speaking on that?
Yeah, really interesting. So first of all, we don't yet have the data on that in terms of whether or not there is a downward trend. We are currently collecting it, so we will soon know that, since we've been following our young people up over time. In terms of potential reasons for that, there has been a really big push both from the government and a lot of different organizations, and that we've seen a lot of different initiatives kind of come out in the last 6 months or so. There's also, we're noticing a bit of a trend on social media for anti-vape use, or that it's cool not to vape. So while in the first instance we were seeing social media used as a way to promote vaping, we're actually also seeing the opposite of that now, as a way to discourage vape use by a lot of influencers. So yeah, I can't speak to whether or not that is actually what the data will tell us, but it's very interesting, and we will certainly know in a few months' time whether that's the case, and we certainly hope that is the case as well.
Yeah, it's great to hear that. I think it's the first time I've heard that messaging from a school, that they are seeing sort of more positive trends. So that's really great to hear anyway.
Absolutely.
We've got a lot of questions come through, just looking for a little bit more detail around the Our Futures Vaping program and maybe associated fees and costs to the school. So maybe you could speak a little bit more to that as well.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, and I think Annabelle mentioned as well, the dissemination of our programs now is all handled by the Our Futures Institute. So they're sort of a separate not-for-profit organisation. There is a fee for module access. It's based on a per student per module fee. I'm not across the specifics. Essentially, if you fill out that registration form, they will get in touch with you and they will chat to you about your school's needs, how many students you have interested, and they will tailor a pricing package to that. I think they may be here as well in the webinar. I don't know if they can comment on the chat as well with any more specifics. I think Ken, the CEO, and Risha, the business manager. Yeah, cool. I don't know if they are here. Risha's here.
Yeah, I think maybe the chat is set up such that they can only speak to us, but Amelia will work her wonderful magic and will re-disseminate that back to everyone with the power of us as panelists. But great to have you both here as well. So Amelia, I'm sure that is all over that as well. and can maybe filter some of those questions as well, Amelia. Wonderful. So do you have any information on where it is that students are acquiring vapes from?
Yeah, so through our work, one of the most common ways that we were hearing about was via online, so via Snapchat, also via older students or friends or siblings who are able to access them directly from tobacconists or convenience stores. Of course, that is going to be a different situation with the new regulations this year, so we are still collecting that information to find out what that looks like in the context of the new regulations that are essentially have started to ban disposable vapes and all non-therapeutic vapes. So yeah, we will find that out as the sort of study goes on.
Yeah, I think that's one of the real traits in this sort of vaping space, is that it's all happening so quickly, and we are, you know, finding things out as it happens, and sort of just doing our best in that space for sure.
Absolutely. Trying to keep up.
I know. So another question, just going back, sorry, I should have tried to group all of the vaping program questions together. But there was a question as well about whether you think there's utility. I know you're still collecting data on the trial, but to target those who are already vaping as opposed to just the prevention side, or do you think it is, yeah, more tailored that way?
Yeah, great question. So we focus in on that primary prevention. So we want to get in before young people are using. I don't know yet in terms of our data whether or not we've also been effective at stopping young people from vaping. There is a certain percentage that were vaping at baseline, so we will know at that 12-month follow-up point whether or not the program was also effective in the area of vaping cessation, not just in terms of preventing those non-users from ever vaping, but also if we were able to prevent or stop young people who were vaping from vaping. And we'll also be able to answer some of those questions around associations between vaping and tobacco use and things like that. So unfortunately, I don't have those answers yet, but we will in time.
Yeah, it's all coming. It's a stay tuned moment.
We're nearly there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You've done so much work, and it's so impressive how rigorously you've developed this program in such a good, quick time frame as well, that we can really get it out to schools while it's still such a problem. So I am sorry, there's so many questions coming in. I'm just doing a little
That's
filter.
okay, take a moment.
Make sure it's not one of the same I've already answered. We are just getting some confirmation from the OurFutures Institute team that yeah, the next steps in terms of pricing are to fill out that registration form, and a team member will be in touch. So just confirming that as well down on this end. Oh, and they keep popping up, it moves my place as well. All the chaos. We are getting some questions. I know this is not something that we have a lot of research on here in Australia at all, but just to sort of acknowledge the comments coming through, because I know there was some articles released on it recently, but snus as sort of an alternative is being talked about quite a bit in, I think, the context of the new vaping regulations. And I guess I certainly haven't come across any good research in that space in Australia. Amy, I would be surprised if you had as well.
Yeah, unfortunately not. I mean, even just the vaping prevalence stuff, we're very limited on those really large scale, nationally representative surveys, but I'm not even familiar with any smaller scale or work in that space. But just, I guess, to add about one of the great things about our program is that we make it in such a way that we're able to update it as things change. So even though it's currently out there under evaluation, my team and I are actually working to update to the latest regulations and the latest things that we're hearing and the latest things that we're finding out. So these programs are not just sort of static. We keep updating them. And certainly if we find out that these smokeless tobacco products are becoming prevalent and are an issue, it's going to be quite easy for us to add in education around that into the existing program.
Yeah, great. So rest assured that OurFutures is on their radar.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Very much so.
There was a question then in relation to some of the prevalence research and data that you have, whether there was you know, you had different demographics split into that. So was there a high percentage of Aboriginal youth in that data that you could speak to? Or was this more, the aim is really maybe just that population level at this stage?
Yeah, so our focus is universal prevention. So I can't speak to what our percentage of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander young people was, but maybe if you are interested in that, the Strong and Deadly Futures project, which is Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander focused and does have a vaping element as well. So that's sort of one of our sister programs at the Matilda Centre. That might be a good place to look for that information.
Yeah, absolutely. I know they're doing some very exciting work in that space at the moment. So if you can't find the link, we're happy to send it through, just get in touch as well. There was also a lot of interest in those tips that you provided for talking to a young person about their e-cigarette use. And just a question on whether that's going to be sort of packaged together somewhere that parents can access, or where to find more, I guess.
Yeah, so we do have tips kind of scattered throughout the module as well. We don't currently have a parent version, but that is something that we are feeling a big push to create. So once we get through this next stage and we have the evidence, we're certainly looking at creating something there that would be a resource that's specifically for parents. We do have summary sheets though, in terms of the information that we provide. So all of that stuff around refusal skills, around building self-efficacy, educating on harms. We have all of that in nice, neat summary sheets for parents and also for teachers. But yeah, in terms of something that's specific to parents, we're still working on it.
Yeah, and I guess it is, you know, you're very focused on those school programs, and I will do a little shameless plug for Positive Choices here now, but just we have recently released talking to your team about e-cigarette and vaping fact sheet for parents. So a lot of the same tips that you were talking about, I think they're highly complementary if that was something that people wanted to have a look at as well while the OurFutures team are in development.
We appreciate that, Emma.
Wonderful. Just having a little look through.
While you're having a look, I just saw a comment that I wanted to comment on, if that's okay.
Perfect.
Someone said that they were surprised at some of the stereotypes that the young people reported about like the cool sporty kid and the nerdy gamer. And I think I was definitely surprised as well. I think it speaks to the importance of working with young people in designing these programs, because I am not that old myself and I work with young people a lot, but even I was clearly a little out of touch in the reality of who is using these, and my assumptions were a little bit off compared to the reality of what they're experiencing, which I think is another huge strength of these programs, is that getting youth involved is embedded in the process so they're as relatable and real for their kids as possible.
Yeah,
Great point, Annabelle.
Yeah, you can't sort of understate the importance of co-design, and hearing from people who are, you know, that lived experience perspective is really crucial, and you and your team do it so well.
Yeah, thanks, Emma. We're always finding out more about the way young people speak is always evolving, and all the different things that young people do. And it's always so surprising to us when we come away and we're like, okay, we need to change that word. We need to change that clothing. We need to keep it all relevant. Yeah, it's an ever evolving space.
Yeah, an ongoing job.
Yeah.
Young. Perfect. I think we have time for one more question. Is there any evidence, or can you comment at all on information regarding sort of vapor for, you know, secondary vaping? I guess it's such a spoken about thing with smoking. I haven't come across very much in that space, so I wonder if you are able to comment more on it.
Yeah, from what I understand, the evidence is quite limited in that space. And this is not my area of expertise, but from what I have seen in the literature, there is some preliminary evidence around secondhand the aerosol being in the air and increased risks to those people around them of nicotine addiction. So it comes back to the fact that it's an aerosol, not a vapor. So it's able to hold those particles in the air for longer. But certainly if you compare that to secondhand smoking, we're not seeing those same types of harms. But I imagine that there's plenty of experts working in this area, and we'll find lots more evidence on that in the years to come.
Yeah, it's another one of those stay tuned. The research is
Yeah.
ongoing spaces, I think. Yeah, but one that a lot of people are certainly curious about, and it will be interesting to see what comes out for sure.
Definitely.
We are coming to the end of our time here today, unfortunately. Just to reiterate that if you did have a question that we didn't get to answer, really sorry, there were a lot coming through, but you are very welcome to email us through at info@positivechoices.org.au. So let me just get that up on the screen for you as well. Oh, almost up on the screen. There it is. So if there was anything we didn't cover that you were still curious about today, please feel free to email us at Positive Choices, and we can direct your query appropriately. But otherwise, a huge thank you again to Amy and Annabelle for running us through all of that really important and useful information today. We do really appreciate it. If you are looking to stay up to date on any future webinars that we might have, you can subscribe to our newsletter, and you can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook at the moment. There's a lot of thank yous coming through in the chat, so I encourage you to have a look at those as well. And just to emphasize again that the recording and a copy of the slides will be available after this presentation as well. So it'll all come through to you as well, so you can check anything that you'd like to have another look at. I think that was all from us today. So thank you again for everyone for joining, and goodbye.